Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. I gotta tell you, I am absolutely thrilled to get into this source material with you today. We're gonna be looking at a seriously fascinating book by Ryuho Okawa called The Laws of Rebirth. It tackles this massive, age-old mystery: what actually happens to our consciousness when our physical bodies finally give out? So whether you're a longtime student of spiritual texts, or you're just kind of curious about how different traditions view the afterlife, buckle up, because this is gonna be a wild and really eye-opening ride.
Now, to really get the most out of what we're looking at today, I'm going to ask you to do something a little bit challenging. I want you to kind of pause your everyday secular assumptions for a minute. Take a look at the question right here. Is death truly just an absolute end, like a light bulb burning out? Or is it just a transition to something else? For the rest of this explainer, we're going to put on the text's spiritual glasses and view a world where the soul's journey keeps going way, way past the physical realm.
All right, here is our roadmap for today. 1. The four sufferings. 2. Truth of eternal life. 3. Earthbound spirits. 4. Reimagining ancestral rites. And 5. The organ transplant controversy. Let's get into it.
Starting us off with Section 1, the Buddha's Four Sufferings.
So Chapter 1 actually takes us way back, like over 2.5 millennia back, right to the very roots of Buddhism. Check out these 4 universal human fears: birth, aging, sickness, and death. According to the text, these 4 sufferings were the exact things that pushed Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, to leave his life of royalty behind. He wasn't just sitting around philosophizing for the fun of it. He was desperately trying to solve this terrifying reality that, well, our bodies eventually break down.
The book really highlights that the Buddha's entire mission was to crack the code of these 4 physical sufferings. And the wildest part? The answer he arrived at wasn't about escaping reality at all. It was about waking up to a deeper one. The author uses this historical quest as a kind of launch pad for the book's main idea: the reality of eternal life. The whole point is that physical suffering only defines us if we make the mistake of thinking we're just physical bodies.
Moving right along to Section 2, Truth of Eternal Life.
And this brings us to the absolute bedrock of the author's philosophy: the firm claim that the soul actually survives the body. It's a total clash of worldviews, really. You've got the material view saying, yep, death is the absolute end of the road. But the spiritual view in our source material, it argues that consciousness seamlessly transitions right into an afterlife. In fact, the author points out that the people who push back hardest against the idea of an afterlife are usually the most shocked when they actually die. The text leans on near-death experiences as major evidence here, basically saying, look, this spiritual reality is waiting for us whether we believe in it right now or not.
Which leads us to Section 3, Earthbound Spirits and Denial.
Okay, so you might be wondering what actually happens if someone completely denies all this, refuses to believe in any kind of afterlife, and then suddenly dies. Well, the text paints this really vivid, honestly kind of tragic picture of what it calls an earthbound spirit. The author warns that souls who totally reject the afterlife can actually get stuck. Because they don't even believe in a spiritual world, they literally lack the awareness to realize they're dead. So they just wander around the physical world, going to their old jobs, hanging out at their old houses, totally oblivious to the fact that nobody living can see or hear them. They're just trapped in this massive state of denial.
And the text gets super specific and, frankly, pretty chilling about what this looks like. Let's say an unawakened person dies suddenly in a car crash or from a really painful illness like stomach cancer. The book claims their spirit might actually keep feeling intense phantom pain long after their physical body is gone. Because their mind is still 100% identifying with that physical flesh, they keep feeling those agonizing stomach aches or those fatal injuries, just desperately wondering why the pain won't stop. It's intense, right?
Let's shift gears to Section 4, Reimagining Ancestral Memorial Services.
So these spiritual rules aren't just abstract ideas. They have super practical, everyday applications for how we interact with the dead. The source text actually takes a pretty hard swing at how modern society handles funerals and memorials. It argues that just hiring a professional monk to come in and chant some complex sutures, yeah, that's often completely useless. Think about it. If an earthbound spirit is hovering there, totally confused, and a monk is chanting in some ancient language they don't even speak, to them, it's literally just noise. The text says true memorials happen when the living actually take the time to understand spiritual truths so they can actively beam that enlightenment over to the lost soul.
There's this quote from the text that I think is just incredibly powerful. It says, "The living must live correctly to serve as a beacon of light." If your ancestors are lost out there in the spiritual realm, maybe stuck in old family dramas or holding grudges, you can't just ritualize them away. The living relatives, us, have to study the truth, clean up our own earthly lives, and elevate our own minds. By doing that, the text says, living family members become a literal beacon of light to guide their ancestors out of those lower realms. You actually become their lifeline.
All right, on to our final and definitely most controversial topic, Section 5, the organ transplant controversy.
Here is where the author applies these strict spiritual rules directly to modern medical science, specifically when it comes to patients declared brain dead. According to the text, there's this thing called the silver cord. It's described as a literal spiritual tether connecting the physical body to the spiritual body. And here is the kicker. The author insists this cord stays completely intact even when a doctor says someone is clinically brain dead. So, in the eyes of this text, brain death is absolutely not spiritual death. The person's soul is still totally strapped into their physical form.
And this sets up a scenario in the book that is honestly just terrifying. Imagine a patient who's completely paralyzed, medically brain dead, but their soul is wide awake and still attached. The text claims that when doctors start surgery to harvest organs, the patient's soul is screaming in absolute terror and agony, "I am still alive, don't take my organs." But of course, the medical staff in the operating room can't hear a thing.
The author maintains that taking organs from a brain-dead patient causes this excruciating, unimaginable level of spiritual pain. Because that silver cord hasn't been cut, the soul feels every slice of the scalpel. The text presents this as a massive, glaring blind spot in modern medicine. It argues that doctors are operating purely on a material view of life, completely unaware of the massive spiritual trauma they're inflicting on the donor.
But wait, the fallout described in the text doesn't even stop with the donor. It cascades right onto the person receiving the organ. Let's walk through the steps they outline. Step 1. The organ is removed while that spiritual cord is still intact. Step 2. Because the deceased donor still feels like they own that organ, their soul actually follows the organ right into the new body. And step 3. The recipient's body is now literally infiltrated by the foreign and probably pretty traumatized soul of the donor.
So why does this matter? Well, this exact mechanism is how the author explains those crazy stories you hear about organ recipients suddenly experiencing massive personality changes. The text argues that the donor's spirit is basically tethered to the transplanted organ and starts messing with the recipient. If the donor is really strong-willed or super angry, the book says it can even escalate into perfect possession, where the donor's personality just completely hijacks the recipient. It's definitely a wild, intense spiritual critique of something we usually just think of as a life-saving medical procedure.
Wow, we have covered some seriously deep and provocative ground today, haven't we? From the Buddha's ancient quest to some really intense spiritual critiques of modern medicine. The whole point of the laws of rebirth is really to challenge us to zoom out, to look past our immediate physical bubble. So I want to leave you with this final thought. If you truly viewed your life, your daily actions, and your inevitable death through the lens of an eternal soul, how would it change the choices you're going to make today? Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this explainer. I really hope it sparked some curiosity and gave you a totally new perspective to chew on. See you next time.